Introduction. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, characterized by decades of political tension, territorial disputes, and human suffering, is deeply intertwined with the issue of movement restrictions imposed by Israel on Palestinians living in the occupied territories. In this comprehensive exploration, we will delve into the multifaceted dimensions of Israeli restrictions on Palestinian movement, examining their historical roots, legal frameworks, humanitarian consequences, and broader implications for peace and security in the region. Through an in-depth analysis, we aim to shed light on this critical aspect of the conflict and its profound impact on the lives of Palestinians. Section 1. Historical context. To understand the current state of movement restrictions, it is essential to delve into the historical context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and the subsequent Arab-Israeli wars led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, many of whom became refugees in neighboring countries or found themselves living under Israeli military occupation in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. The occupation, which began in 1967 following the Six-Day War, marked the beginning of a new phase in the conflict and laid the groundwork for the imposition of movement restrictions on the Palestinian population. The roots of Israeli restrictions on Palestinian movement can be traced back to the early years of occupation, during which Israel implemented a system of military checkpoints, roadblocks, and curfews to control the movement of Palestinian civilians. These measures, ostensibly implemented for security reasons, had a significant impact on the daily lives of Palestinians, restricting their ability to travel freely, access essential services, and pursue economic opportunities. Over time, the proliferation of settlements in the occupied territories further complicated the situation, leading to the construction of barriers and checkpoints to separate Israeli and Palestinian populations. Section 2. Legal frameworks and justifications. The imposition of movement restrictions by Israel raises complex legal and ethical questions regarding the rights of Palestinians living under occupation. Under international humanitarian law, Israel, as the occupying power, is obligated to ensure the welfare and safety of the civilian population in the occupied territories, including their right to freedom of movement. However, Israeli authorities often justify movement restrictions on security grounds, citing the need to prevent terrorist attacks and protect Israeli citizens living in nearby settlements. Critics argue that many of the movement restrictions imposed by Israel are disproportionate and indiscriminate, resulting in the collective punishment of the Palestinian population. The construction of the separation barrier, for example, has led to the encirclement of Palestinian communities, effectively isolating them from the outside world and restricting their access to essential services such as healthcare and education. Moreover, the establishment of Israeli-only roads and checkpoints has created a system of apartheid-like segregation, further exacerbating the humanitarian impact of movement restrictions on Palestinians. Section 3. Humanitarian consequences. The humanitarian consequences of Israeli restrictions on Palestinian movement are far-reaching and severe, affecting nearly every aspect of daily life for Palestinians living in the occupied territories. Access to healthcare, for example, is severely hampered by movement restrictions, with Palestinians often facing delays and obstacles when seeking medical treatment outside their local communities. Similarly, access to education is impeded by checkpoints and barriers, making it difficult for students to attend school or university and limiting their opportunities for academic and personal growth. Economic opportunities for Palestinians are also severely restricted by movement restrictions, with many communities cut off from markets, employment centers, and agricultural land. The inability to travel freely between Palestinian cities and villages hinders the flow of goods and services, stifling economic development and exacerbating poverty and unemployment rates. Moreover, movement restrictions have a profound psychological impact on Palestinians, contributing to feelings of isolation, despair, and hopelessness. Section 4. Resistance and Resilience. Despite the profound challenges posed by Israeli restrictions on Palestinian movement, Palestinians have demonstrated remarkable resilience and resourcefulness in navigating and resisting the occupation. Grassroots movements and civil society organizations have emerged to advocate for Palestinian rights and challenge the legality and morality of movement restrictions imposed by Israel. Non-violent forms of resistance, such as protests, boycotts, and civil disobedience campaigns, have drawn international attention to the plight of Palestinians living under occupation and mobilized support for their cause. Palestinian communities have also developed innovative strategies to overcome the barriers imposed by Israeli restrictions on movement, including the establishment of alternative transportation networks, community-based healthcare initiatives, and solidarity campaigns with marginalized and vulnerable populations. Despite facing immense obstacles, Palestinians continue to assert their rights to freedom of movement, dignity, and self-determination, embodying the spirit of resilience and resistance in the face of oppression and injustice. Section 5. International Responses and Responsibilities. The international community has a critical role to play in addressing Israeli restrictions on Palestinian movement and advancing efforts to achieve a just and lasting peace in the region. International organizations, such as the United Nations and the International Committee of the Red Cross, have repeatedly condemned Israeli policies and practices that violate the rights of Palestinians living under occupation, including movement restrictions. Similarly, human rights organizations and advocacy groups have called attention to the humanitarian consequences of movement restrictions and called for accountability for violations of international law. However, diplomatic efforts to address Israeli restrictions on Palestinian movement have often been stymied by political divisions, competing interests, and a lack of political will among key stakeholders. The United States, as Israel's closest ally, has historically provided unwavering support for Israeli policies and practices in the occupied territories, including movement restrictions. Similarly, regional dynamics, such as the normalization of relations between Israel and some Arab states, have shifted the focus away from the plight of Palestinians and undermined efforts to hold Israel accountable for its actions. Conclusion. In conclusion, Israeli restrictions on Palestinian movement constitute a fundamental aspect of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, shaping the lives of millions of Palestinians living under occupation and hindering prospects for peace and stability in the region. From the historical roots of the occupation to the legal frameworks and humanitarian consequences of movement restrictions, the issue is complex and multifaceted, requiring a comprehensive and nuanced understanding. By shedding light on the realities faced by Palestinians and highlighting the resilience and resistance of affected communities, we can contribute to efforts to address the root causes of the conflict and advance the cause of justice, dignity, and self-determination for all. Like and share the video and press the subscription button and bell icon to get updated.